Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This time on Careers in Discovery, Emma is with Robert Fletcher, co-founder and CEO of Nanolyx, a company developing sustainable antimicrobial technologies to solve one of the world's biggest challenges, antimicrobial resistance. Robert had an unusual path into biotech. He worked every entry-level job he could find before returning to school in his 30s to study biochemistry. We talked about that journey, the mindset needed to navigate entrepreneurship, the importance of mentorship, and why curiosity is the most important skill.
So welcome back to Careers in Discovery. Today I'm joined by Robert Fletcher, co-founder and CEO at Nanolyx. Welcome, Robert.
Welcome, Emma. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
It's great. I can't wait to get into your story. Shall we start a little bit about talking about Nanolyx and the work you're doing at the moment?
Absolutely. So let me first tell you a little bit about the history of Nanolyx. We're an early stage company working to commercialize novel antimicrobials for a range of applications. So this company was spun out of PhD work that was completed at Northeastern University. A couple of our co-founders there were working on nanoparticle synthesis, and they discovered the materials they were making had strong antimicrobial properties. This material really comes in the form of like a dry powder that can be complexed with various other materials. So it can be dispersed in water to make a potent disinfectant, or else kind of integrated within a gel or a fabric of something of that nature. The company was founded and incorporated back in 2020. With the help of some NSF funding, some patents were filed on a couple technologies related to this work. The company really originally envisioned a technology being used as a medical device coating. So this is a route that would have taken us through the FDA. And early attempts to kind of generate funding were a little bit frustrated by concerns about risk and the long timeline associated with bringing a product through the FDA pipeline. So and this kind of gets into a larger story kind of about the history of the company. But basically, our previous CEO went to med school, and the company was really dormant for about a year or two, and was resurrected at late 2023 when I joined in the role of interim CEO.
That's fascinating. So we often talk about how having the right people in an organization, when you come to a hurdle or a challenge, it allows you to be able to overcome that. How did you end up moving away from the FDA and moving towards EPA?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it was really just driven by the feedback that we received from investors that we spoke with at that time. The interesting thing about being an early stage startup is that you have to really be malleable in terms of your objective, your applications, and the kind of the way that you evolve as an organization. This can involve fluidity in terms of the personnel, but also the applications that you're pursuing. Especially with something like this technology, right? So as an antimicrobial company, you realize the potential for the technology is massive, right? Because microbes are responsible for things like body odor, for material breaking down, for food spoiling, for livestock and agricultural operations being impacted negatively. So the potential for an antimicrobial technology is huge, which is both kind of an exciting thing, but also a little bit overwhelming, because what it means is you can pitch this so many ways, but you also want to convey to investors and partners that you've really done your due diligence and looked at a specific application. So kind of striking that balance between pitching this as a platform or a versatile technology, but also showing that you're focused in on a beachhead is one of the challenges you have to navigate as an early stage company.
That's really interesting.
I think that's what really drove the transition from the FDA to the EPA.
Yeah, you managed to find your niche and speed to effectiveness.
Absolutely. I mean, it's still very much an ongoing process. As I mentioned, the technology it kind of produces this powder in the form of nano and microparticles that really kill bacteria, viruses, fungi very effectively. It's a dry powder that can be formulated into various other products, as I mentioned. So we're looking at surface disinfections as our beachhead application, which would entail really liquid sprays, wipes, and liquid solutions. But I'm very excited to pursue like antimicrobial fabrics, water purification, material construction coatings, other applications as a follow-on. But that would really kind of come after our first beachhead application.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. I suppose it's always nice when we're talking to people to understand why science. How did you decide this was the career path for you?
That is a really good question. I think that my passion for science has always been a part of me in some form. Like, I'm a really curious person and I've always been that way since childhood. Like, I was always fascinated by how things interact in the natural world,
Yeah.
how things interact within the brains and bodies of living organisms. Studying biochemistry just allowed me to better understand these relationships. Being that biochemistry is really at the intersection of biology and chemistry and really relates to fields like medicine, neurochemistry, pharmacology, microbiology. These are things that always fascinated me greatly. And so I just really wanted an opportunity to kind of understand the world at a granular level. I've been working for the last couple of years in therapeutics, which especially with startups at various stages. I've never really worked at like the big pharma. So I really like the chaos of some of these early stage companies, and entrepreneurship fits right in there. When you're part of a 30-person organization, you just have a greater opportunity to distinguish yourself. There's a lot of work to do and it can be very hectic, but there's also a ton of opportunity for growth and just to develop new skills. So I really enjoy that about science. The opportunity to kind of continue to learn and just see how everything fits together in the world around us.
Yeah. Okay. Talk me through your career story from your education and the most formative parts that have got you to where you are today.
Absolutely. So I've taken very much kind of a winding career path. And I think really my career story, although it's before my career, would really start around high school. So I grew up in New Hampshire, the seacoast area of New Hampshire predominantly. Very kind of culturally homogenous area. And I think by the time I finished my junior year, I really was looking for, a kind of a more diverse and broad experience in the world. So I had an opportunity to complete a study abroad program in Spain for the first half of my senior year of high school. So I was able to go down to San Fernando, Cadiz area down in Spain and live there for 5.5 months. This was just an incredibly formative experience in my life. I got to, live with a family that spoke no English. I went to a high school that people spoke very little English with the exception of my French teacher. Whereas in here in the US, we take French or Spanish as an option in public school. Over there, they get to take English or French in Spain. So I took French for the first time, ironically, in Spanish, and which was very interesting. And ironically, my teacher was about the only one in that town that spoke any English, so I was able to kind of have that bridge. But
how good was your Spanish when you went?
I took it for a few years in school, so very much like you get to study it for about a year in the classroom, and then it wasn't really until I went there fully immersed, and I picked it up so quickly. I think I was fluent in like 2 weeks. And I've since unfortunately lost a lot of it, but I still try to practice it when I can. But that experience was so formative for me, just as a way to step outside of my comfort zone and really navigate a lot of these challenges, like the challenges associated with just growing up that I'd never really had to deal with, that I've having to deal with them in a second language and a new culture, was such a formative and growing experience for me that when I came home, I just felt like I had grown so much, like kind of stepping back into the drama associated with your senior year of high school. I was just so beyond it. I was so over it.
Yeah.
After that, I went out to college in the Pacific Northwest at a very non-traditional school called Evergreen State College. Kind of a very hippie school. This is where Matt Groening, who invented The Simpsons, went. I had this book that was like college gem schools, like unheard of schools. I was really at a loss of where to go to college. And this school just kind of spoke to me. I attended there for a couple years. Ultimately didn't really love it. And so I took some time off, and then I think I got like an associate's degree, and then ultimately just took a lot of time off. Spent the next several years living around the country, different areas, working really every like entry-level job you could work. And for me, these were also super formative experiences. I've worked like every kind of job from like construction to painting to retail, sales, car sales, newspaper sales over the phone, interviewing, election polling, all that kind of stuff. And I think for me, honestly, I have to mention that because that was also so formative for me, really. I mean, I think it really instilled in me a work ethic, and it instilled in me just kind of an ability to perceive the world and perceive just such a huge sampling of people going about their lives and their activities. But also it really instilled in me a lot of those soft skills, which I think are so important to biotech and just human interactions in general. Particularly the sales work. Like the sales work is really, it's brutal, but it's a lot of fun. And it's also, you learn so much. I think one of the worst jobs I've ever worked, but also maybe the most fun I've ever had on the clock, was working at a company called AMR, A Marketing Resource. This is basically like a call center that was located, I think it might still be there, in South St. Paul. There's a show that came out recently called Telemarketers on Max, HBO Max.
Okay.
That's a great show that really kind of shows what this world is like. But it was just a crazy job where you're basically speaking to people on the phone, trying to sell them newspaper subscriptions. And it was such a tough job, but the opportunity to really try to like persuade someone on the phone when you're basically have no face-to-face interaction with them was such a formative experience for me. So that's kind of just to say that I worked a ton of different jobs. They were crazy. I enjoyed them. And then I really decided to kind of come back to school, in my late 20s, or when I just turned 30, I wanted to go back to school for biochemistry. So I came back for biochemistry. My family really never envisioned that I would be in the hard sciences. My father's an author. My mom is also in education and she's a painter. My parents really envisioned me in the arts somehow, or maybe some kind of a creative pursuit. And then I started studying biochemistry, and what I found was that, there's such an opportunity for creativity in the sciences. Especially and same with kind of those soft skills I described, extroversion, interpersonal skills, social intelligence. There's such an opportunity for that as well. And I think it sometimes can be lacking in the sciences, right? There's a lot of like type A personalities in the sciences, and which can create some opportunity there as well. So I came back for biochemistry and found that I loved it and that I was good at it. And so I kind of jumped into that, and then I jumped into a master's program and started completing the co-op mechanism. So the co-op is basically like a paid internship. I can't speak highly enough of them. Northeastern does a lot of them. I was at UNH, the University of New Hampshire. They also have a co-op vehicle there. Really just a great opportunity to kind of jump into a company for like 6 months, get your feet wet, and then you effectively leave and either kind of go back to school or complete another co-op, as was the case for me. So I got the chance to complete a 6-month co-op with the Flagship Pioneering company. And it was at this time, it was the end of this first co-op that I met the original scientific founder of Nanolyx, David Medina Cruz. He's a good friend of mine. He founded Nanolyx as well as 2 other companies out of his PhD work in Northeastern back in 2020.
Wow. Okay.
And so when I mentioned, and as I mentioned, I think earlier in our conversation, when I met him, we became friends. And towards the end of my co-op there, he kind of approached me and said, "Hey, I've founded these 3 companies that I work with, in limited capacity on the side." And he mentioned Nanolyx, and I've really always had like a passion for sustainability and entrepreneurship. And so when he mentioned this technology to produce, these potent antimicrobial particles from a circular economy component. And I haven't really talked about that. We can talk about that later, kind of what differentiates our technology from the competitive landscape. But, these materials are effectively produced from elemental salts and organic waste, right? So they're able to kind of retool this waste material into these particles. And the features of the material that we produce make them kind of safer for the environment on the level of production, but also on the level of disposal potentially.
Right.
So so when he mentioned this opportunity to get involved with a company, which I viewed as a great chance to learn about entrepreneurship, and also, an opportunity to further something that would produce a positive environmental impact, I was super excited. So that's kind of where I jumped into this role. And then I'll kind of bring you through the remainder of my education, because at this point, as you remember, I'm still a master's student.
Yeah.
So I finished up that first co-op with a great company in Flagship Pioneering, kind of working on tRNAs, and then jumped into another co-op. That's another 6-month co-op with another Flagship Pioneering company, kind of in a different capacity. My first one was working in pharmacology. My second one was in downstream process development for kind of purification strategies with another company in the Flagship Pioneering ecosystem. I got my co-op extended there to 8 months. So I completed an 8-month co-op there and then finished. And at that point, I finished my master's degree. Then I got the fun task of hunting for a full-time job in a really brutal biotech market.
Very brutal.
Which was kind of felt like I was going through another major in university as well, just because that was a pretty challenging task, and was fortunate to find a full-time position at a company that I'm currently at, another Flagship Pioneering, very early stage company, still kind of in stealth mode, so I can't really discuss too much of the work we do there, but very exciting. So I've been working full-time at that company for about the last 6 months. Throughout all of this, I've been working at Nanolyx, on the side, kind of trying to commercialize this technology. Very exciting, but there's a ton of work to do. As you know, the process of working as an entrepreneur in with an early stage company is incredibly challenging.
Yeah. So talk me through, you're relatively early in your career, and for a long time you've had the role of interim CEO at Nanolyx. Mm-hmm. Talk me through how you adjust your mindset and how you go about learning the skills that you need when you're thrown into this situation.
That's a really good question. It is kind of a constant challenge. And as you mentioned, right, there's this really interesting dichotomy between, on the one hand, I'm working basically at the bottom of the career ladder in the hierarchy, right? I'm working at like an entry-level job in a lab position. On the other hand, I'm tasked with, even in an interim capacity, right, being a CEO for this early stage organization. I think really the unitive theme there that really helps me kind of balance these two things is this aspect of curiosity, which is something that I always try to bring to all my work. I think it's a huge attribute in science. To be curious, I think is maybe much more important than your technical capabilities. You need both of them, but I think curiosity is something that's so important in science, right? It's like, because science is really something that fails until it doesn't. It kind of fails and fails and fails, and you have to ask yourself, why is this failing? Try everything, and when you rule out everything that doesn't work, you maybe can find the things that do work. So, in my full-time job, I try to be curious and learn as much as possible. The other role is really the same thing. There's just different things to learn and so many more things to learn. Obviously, being that I'm so inexperienced in that role, like humility is hugely important. Really, one of my primary responsibilities, or the ways that I spend my time during my work with Nanolyx, is really just taking meetings with mentors, with advisors, with other entities that can kind of help coach me through things and learn a ton. I spent probably my first 8 months or so in that role. We were accepted to a program called the Eddies 2024 through Mass Innovation Network. This is where I met Kelly McInnes and a ton of great people, and just a ton of people that have, some of them have stepped into advisory capacities with the company. Some of them are collaborators. Some of them are fellow entrepreneurs working to develop their own really exciting technology. But that program entailed an 8-month, basically, it's like an 8-month kind of micro accelerator program. So every week you have a mentoring module, you have a mentor or two that are assigned to you through the organization, and then the program culminates with a pitch competition. There's 4 or 5 different innovation tracks, and so we pitched for the clean tech innovation track, and we're excited we won that innovation track, which is really exciting. So thank you. So we won a little bit of money, and just more importantly, kind of the visibility and the opportunity to learn everything along the way. So that was a huge learning experience for me, right? Just kind of being coached through the myriad considerations of these early stage companies, whether it's cap table management, financial vehicles for raising money, regulatory considerations, material sourcing, marketing, outreach, all that kind of stuff. Those are all hats that you have to wear as an early stage founder. One day you're designing a website, the other day you're maybe working on a grant application. It's a constant learning opportunity. And I would like to think that, if I had a ton more experience, I hope I would retain this mindset of trying to learn as much as possible. Right. I think that
to keep growing, to keep evolving.
Yeah, totally. It's right? We talk about like confirmation bias in the sciences, right? With like the way you design an experiment. But I think the way that we as human beings, process the world around us, we have that same confirmation bias in everything we do, right? Our brains are wired to recognize patterns and interpret things based on judgment. And so it's so easy to kind of bring a myopic perspective into scientific research or everything that we do. And I think that like the way to kind of combat against that is to bring in other voices, right? To not be subject to only my own opinion, but to kind of bring in a plurality of voices and inputs of ideas, so I can kind of make decisions from a balanced perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And we often talk about the mentorship and how important that is. Would you have any advice to people who are looking to seek support and how you go about finding that support?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of find myself on both sides of the mentorship thing, right? Yes. I, in my work, especially with Nanolyx, I'm constantly seeking advice from people that are more experienced. At my work in university and kind of my fledgling career in biotech, at least as like a researcher, I try to serve as a mentor on the other end, right? So right now I'm working with a student from the University of New Hampshire as a career mentor, as someone who, recently was there and now is in industry, right? So, when I was at university, I was a leader and a coordinator for a program called Peer-Led Team Learning, PLTL. Okay. So it was an opportunity to kind of run science curricula with a small group of students and teach what you've learned and kind of talk through exercises and whatnot. So mentorship is huge for me. As I mentioned, both my parents were educators. And so I think in terms of accessing that, it's really kind of dependent upon the organization that you're in. But I think that it can be challenging to find mentorship, especially when you're in industry, I believe. A lot of the times, like, you're maybe subject to, the priorities of your immediate team or your manager. Navigating how to seek mentorship can be a little bit challenging, right? Like if I've been blessed to have really great managers in industry, but, I know people who have had less than positive experiences with their managers, and it can be hard to really go outside those conventional channels and say, I want to learn this new skill, or I feel like my ideas aren't being appreciated, I feel like there's not reciprocity here in this relationship. How do you kind of broach those subjects? So I think, for me, it's like, it's always helpful to just find people at an organization you trust and be as transparent as possible. But as I mentioned, I've been fortunate to have, good ecosystems of people around me to kind of listen and share ideas. Not everyone has that benefit. Universities are great because they tend to build in opportunities for that, right? They build in chances for you to kind of seek mentorship. I spent a lot of time at I don't know what the office is called, like the advisor's office, or just kind of like the support offices. Like they showed me how to build resumes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Because me kind of going back to school after a long hiatus, I was like, wow, there was a lot of things I was navigating for the first time. But yeah, it's so important. It's a really important question to ask, is like, how do we seek mentorship? I don't think there's just one answer, really. I really think it's so dependent upon the context you find yourself in. Yeah.
And using everything as an opportunity, whether you're at a conference or an exhibition, or like being involved in something like the EDIs, those accelerator programs, connecting with people in whatever means that you have access to them, and building that common ground and keeping those relationships alive is really important.
Absolutely. The EDIs was fantastic. I can't say enough good things about Sophia and the people that run that program, but just also, there's a whole host of people that make the program possible, right? From the sponsors to the people that kind of put their space up for use, to the fellow entrepreneurs. And it's interesting. You would expect maybe, right, when you have this ecosystem where all these people are competing for prizes and visibility and potentially funding, you'd think it would be really cutthroat.
Yeah.
But it wasn't actually, right? It was, I think everyone who I interacted with through that program was just so like humbled and grateful to be there, and so excited to share their work with other people. And I found, like I've purchased products off of people that I directly
Okay.
competed against, or I've, I've applied to programs that, the people I competed against told me, hey, I think this program would be great for your company. And I
Yeah.
applied. Or, I met with someone from JP Morgan about setting up an account, but they were kind of more geared towards the FDA path, right? Of
Right.
like
Yeah.
of the early stage companies. So I passed them along to one of my colleagues that I'd worked with at the Eddies, right? So we've all kind of helped each other out.
Yeah. Keeping that network alive. Yeah.
Yeah. And Boston's a great place for it. There's
Yeah.
like there's so much here in Boston. And kind of going back to your question about like, seeking mentorship, I feel like in the Boston area, there are so many, right? There's like Greentown Labs, there's all these bio incubators there's so many opportunities for people to kind of get out there and just pitch their ideas, talk to other people. From my point of view, it's really just the only limitation is time, right? Especially kind of working with a full-time job on the side, like working a full-time job and pursuing this as a side job, at least for the current time. Just the limitation is time, right? There's just not enough time in the day to attend all these opportunities, pitch events, accelerators, applications, and stuff like that.
Yeah. You have to choose wisely.
Definitely.
So what's next? What's next for you, Robert? What's next for Nanolyx?
Yeah, it's a great question. So currently we are kind of at the point right now where after having finished the Eddies, we're looking to move into fundraising. The way that I would like to pursue a lot of this is through non-dilutive opportunities, effectively like grants and accelerators. Now that's maybe become a little more challenging under the recent political changes, right? Some of the federal opportunities for funding are a little bit more scarce. You kind of have to tweak your application, maybe going through like DARPA or the DoD is still available, but some of the conventional channels for funding, NIH and stuff like that might be a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
But really applying for grants. We're still talking with investors. We're still at the point where we're getting ready to kind of move into some of those conversations. Really, the path that we're at here, we're in our late stage R&D, right? So a lot of the times when you speak with an investor, they're really interested in, it depends on the nature of investment, but a lot of the times they're interested in helping a company scale, right? When you have like a prototype and you say, look, I need to build a bigger factory so I could produce more of these products and sell them to customers. That's the kind of appeal that investors typically want. Investing in R&D is a little bit more challenging. Now in the FDA route, it's understood that, you need years of R&D before you can get a product to market.
Huge amounts of money.
Yeah, amounts of money and time, right? And the juice tends to be worth the squeeze. Now it's a little bit more challenging where you're not bringing a therapeutic to market, right? You're bringing a material product to market. Now, that being said, I think our technology has massive potential. As I mentioned, our beachhead application of surface disinfectants, I think there's definitely potential there. But I think that I look at that more as a stepping stone and a gateway to a bunch of other follow-along applications. So I would really like to fund our late-stage R&D with non-dilutive funding, just as a way because, as the name implies, it doesn't dilute you. But also it's just really able to de-risk your technology in the eyes of investors when you go to outside investment to really scale the technology. Yeah. So that's really what's next is, we've been applying for grants. We're involved in some really interesting conversations with potential collaborators. Like we know some other companies that are working on technology that really need antimicrobial features within their integrated within their products, right? So we have, we're involved in discussions with some really interesting collaborators, and we're also involved in discussion with some really interesting R&D collaborators to kind of help us, finish up the research that's required to secure EPA regulation. That, and I haven't mentioned that yet. That's definitely like the next big milestone for us is to get regulated through the EPA. Fortunately, way easier than the FDA, a lot cheaper, takes a lot less time, but is still.
What are the timeframes like? I'm very much used to working with sort of therapeutic companies and less with material science. What are those timeframes to commercialization or to regulatory approval?
Yeah, it really depends on how much work you've done ahead of time, right? It can, if you have like everything submitted, it can happen in as quickly as a year or two.
Okay.
But really, a lot of the times is producing the data package that's required to kind of get regulated through the EPA, right? So there's a couple things that kind of come into this. One of them is a label submission, right? So you've seen like the labels on products like Lysol and Clorox and whatnot. All those claims that you've seen there, really have to obviously be validated by experiments and protocols that are done in accordance with, the SOPs that the EPA require to kind of grant regulatory compliance and approval. So what's exciting about this is, this idea is not at the stage where like, oh, we have an idea. Like we have de-risked this in terms of at the academic lab level. And we have patents, we have publications, that are peer reviewed about this science, right? So we really de-risked this technology to a large extent, and we've kind of published that and we've had it peer reviewed. But now the next step is kind of replicating that in accordance with the EPA guidelines, so that we can kind of produce the data package that they're going to want to see that's complicit with their guidelines, but also kind of produce the data package that's required to back up a label submission, right? Because we want to be able to kind of make claims. And that's kind of an interesting segue to kind of talk about some of the differentiators of this technology. So, when we look at something like surface disinfectants, you could imagine, and you'd probably be right to imagine, this is a pretty crowded space, right? Like you have Clorox, for example, which is really cheap and works really well. There's a lot of these different products, and then there's a few of them, like, seventh generation, that are more that are more eco-friendly. So there's already kind of some eco-friendly products out there, and there's already some really effective antimicrobials. I'd say the two differentiators of our technology, one of them is the sustainable component, and the other one is this issue of antimicrobial resistance. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that on this on this podcast, because antimicrobial resistance is a huge problem that's challenging a ton of different industries. In layperson's terms, what antimicrobial resistance is when we overuse disinfectants, we're helping germs develop a resistance to them. This is maybe easiest to be understood in terms of bacteria, which replicate really, really quickly, and they have a ton of genetic diversity between them. And they can also kind of transfer genes between them in something called horizontal gene transfer. So basically, you've probably seen on a Clorox bottle, like, kills 99.9% of germs, right? Everyone's seen that. And so what I kind of like to talk about that as a way to emphasize or illustrate this analogy. But so say you kill 99.9% of germs, or 99.99% of germs, that remaining 0.01% likely has a genetic mutation that causes it to be able to be resistant to that antimicrobial. So it has something in its genes that helps it resist against Clorox, the mechanism of action by which the antimicrobial kills the pathogen. Now, what happens when you kill the 99.9% of the other ones? Now you've kind of cleared out the playing field, and that one resistant strain can kind of expand and propagate. Now, as you continue to clean the surface over multiple iterations, you help select for these resistant organisms, right? And this is how we got strains of bacteria like MRSA. So MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It originally was Staph aureus, and it became resistant through the selection of that one specific strain. So this issue of antimicrobial resistance means that the more disinfectants we use, we're helping germs develop a resistance to them. And what's happening is we're having these pathogens that are just really hard to kill, right? Like MRSA and C. diff and some of these different strains are incredibly resistant, and they're creating a lot of problems in healthcare settings, but they're also creating issues for agriculture, livestock operations, and stuff of that nature. So what that means is we really need novel strategies to be able to kill these resistant superbugs and pathogens. So the way our technology kind of addresses this is that we kill microbes by multifactorial mechanism, right? So a lot of these antimicrobials, they either kind of disrupt the membrane, or they cross-link nucleic acids, or they induce reactive oxygen species within the bacteria. We work by kind of all three of those mechanisms, and maybe even other mechanisms of action that we haven't fully characterized yet. So what we've shown is that, what we do to test something like resistance, you do what's called a repeat exposure test, where you basically take a microbe and you kind of culture it on a plate, and then you treat it with an antimicrobial agent, and you see what survives. You take a little, swab of whatever survives, and you reculture it on another plate, and you kind of iterate over and over again as a way through that process to see what you can select for. So we conducted these kind of tests with our materials against MRSA, a multi-drug resistant E. coli, bacteriophage and fungi as well, a whole panel of microbes over repeat exposure tests to see how our material compared to, antifungals, antibacterials, but also traditional things like ethanol, commercially available nanoparticles, bleach, stuff like that. And what we found is that our material kills pathogens much more effectively and it doesn't induce resistance, so this is super exciting. What it means is that we have a material that does not contribute to antimicrobial resistance, but also that it's produced in a sustainable manner, right? It's produced from, we mostly produce from citrus juice, but also we can produce from coffee waste. So we can use, so we can use organic food waste and material waste as a way to produce these particles. So these two features, the features of being eco-friendly and sustainable, but also not contributing to antimicrobial resistance, these are two features that are desperately looked for in the surface disinfectant space, but also all across the antimicrobial spectrum.
Yeah. There is huge potential.
Yeah. So it's very exciting. It's a very exciting thing to be working on. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. There's a ton of challenges associated with bringing a company from the early stages. And to anyone who's really interested in this, I would totally encourage anyone to go for it, but to also just be aware of what it takes. I think like resilience is so important through a venture like this. Because there are so many challenges, right, just associated with it. And like anything in life, you're going to encounter a lot of rejection, right? Whether you talk to an investor or a partner, we've talked to some people about this technology and they're like, oh, we're concerned about safety, or we're concerned about biocompatibility. And like, these are things that, there will be further testing on all these things, right? But it's like, if someone at the surface looks at your technology and says, oh, I don't think this is going to work, right? Like, that isn't necessarily a means to say, oh, I throw up my
hand. Doesn't mean everyone. Don't give in. It doesn't mean everyone's going to have the same view.
Exactly. Absolutely.
It's been absolutely fascinating having you part of the conversation, part of the podcast today, Robert.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you. As I mentioned, I've listened to some of your previous episodes, just some really fascinating entrepreneurs and leaders in industry kind of working in companies at all different stages. So it's very exciting to kind of bring a more early stage perspective to the conversation, especially kind of someone who's straddling these two worlds, right, of scientific research and also entrepreneurship simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. You're wearing many hats.
Certainly.
But best of luck with everything. I can't wait to see some positive results coming out for you next. And thank you for taking part.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And once again, I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs, and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium, or TikTok. See you next time.